right, here we go. Let Carrie get in here. Morning, Carrie. Well, good morning, everybody. It is 7:33, approaching 7:33 on Thursday, March 23rd, 2023, and this is the meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. City Council is sitting in that capacity. We're at City Hall Council Chambers in the city of Edina, Minnesota, and this morning, as is our practice, we are continuing to do these meetings both live and online, and so you have a chance to participate in community comment. There are no public hearings this morning. If you wish to participate in community comment, you can see that phone number on the screen. If you're listening in, remember that you cannot comment on something that's on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing. So feel free to call in and express any concerns or comments that you want to share with the HRA this morning by calling that number. Punch in the PIN number. You'll speak to an operator who will bring you into Director Benarad, who will get you to the HRA. And having provided that information, I'll now call the meeting to order, and I'll ask our Administrative Planning Specialist, Liz Olson, to call the roll.
Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We've got a form of meeting agenda that's been published to the public and for us. Is there anyone that wishes to modify the meeting agenda in any form or fashion? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved. A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And next is community comment. We are back to community comment already. Again, folks, just a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes to speak to the HRA if you have a matter of concern that you wish to discuss with us as your HRA commissioners. There's your call-in number, conference PIN number. And remember, it cannot be something that's on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing. So is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the HRA? I see just staff people and consultants out there in the audience this morning. So I'll turn now to Director Benarad to see if we have anybody online on this spring break week.
Right. My day is off to a lonely start. I don't have any callers at this time. Because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait 1 minute before moving on. My clock shows it at 7:35, so I'll come back to you at 7:36 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Okay, we'll wait for that call from Cancun or Sanibel Island or wherever it might come in from.
I don't have any callers at this time, so I think it is safe for you to move forward with your agenda.
Okay. Our practice at the HRA is just as it has been with the City Council, that the city manager who sits here at the HRA as executive director typically responds to comments, community comments that were made in the prior meeting. And I see there is a notation on the agenda. You do not have any comments this morning.
None.
All right. Thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the commission that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved. A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we are on to the heart of the meeting, which is two matters in the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. And that is, and the first matter there is potential modifications to our, what we call our home rehab loan program. And we've got Addison Lewis with us this morning from our staff, our economic development coordinator, and then we've also got our affordable housing manager, Stephanie Hawkinson, available for any questions. And so, welcome, Mr. Lewis. Nice to have you with us this morning, and go ahead with your presentation.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Here today to get some direction from you all on some possible modifications to our home rehab program. Some of you may recall this program was created just a couple years ago in April of 2021. It provides deferred loans to Edina residents to address health, safety, and code issues in their homes, as well as any energy improvements that might be identified through a home energy squad visit. The program came about because it was a recommendation of the Housing Strategy Task Force and also had support from the Edina Housing Foundation. It's been a really successful program so far. We've had really good participation from over 17 neighborhoods in Edina. Center for Energy and Environment serves as our loan administrator and loan servicer for this program. And the program goals, as stated at the time the program was created, were to, one, preserve some of Edina's more modestly priced homes in the community, to promote environmental sustainability by making homes more energy efficient, and then thirdly, to provide a financing option that is fully deferred to help homeowners save on monthly cash flow. Just some details of the loan program. So households earning up to 125% AMI are eligible. The maximum home value limit was set at $450,000 by the HRA in 2021. The maximum loan amount is $30,000, and loans are secured by a mortgage to the property. Loans are 2% non-compounding simple interest and may be deferred up to 30 years, meaning borrowers are not required to make any payments during that time. Eligible properties include single-family homes, structures with up to 4 units, and townhome and condos with individual PIDs. As I mentioned, repayment is due at the end of either 30 years or when the home is either sold, transferred, or it no longer becomes the primary residence of the borrower. A secondary benefit of this program is that the borrower may have the loan forgiven if it's mutually agreed upon by the borrower and the HRA that the home be sold to the HRA for our housing preservation program. It is a mutual decision, so they're not obligated to offer the home to us, and we are not obligated to purchase it. It's just if at the time we both agree to purchase the property, we can do that, and they can have their loan 100% forgiven. The HRA has allocated $1.5 million to this program from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It started as just a $250,000 allocation, and there was immediate interest in the program from the community, and so it was just a few months later that Stephanie was back asking for more money for this program. And the total amount that's been allocated is $1.5 million. So there's been 42 loans that have been issued, just over $900,000. 17 of those have been for single-family homes, and 25 have been for townhomes or condos. So that brings us to the first item for you to consider, and that's whether or not you want to convert this to a revolving loan program. I think when this program was created, it was perhaps implied but not specified what would happen with funds once they are repaid. So the question is, do you want loans that have been paid back to the HRA to be able to be recycled for new loans? There's about $400,000 remaining for loan disbursement, so once that would run out, we would need an additional allocation to be able to make new loans unless converted to a revolving loan fund. That would help make it a little bit more sustainable, as we would have some money coming back into the program. But alternatively, repaid funds could be used for another purchase or another purpose as determined by the HRA. The second item for you to consider is just if you want to amend that home value limit of $450,000 that was set 2 years ago. That was the maximum that was set, and then it was determined to start administering the program limit at $425,000, just to be consistent with the Come Home to Edina program. But that program, the value has since increased to $500,000. And then for context, median home values in Edina have increased 21.8% in the last 2 years. So if you were to do a 21.8% increase to $450,000, that would get you to about $550,000. So the HRA could set it at whatever you like, but if you do choose to do an increase, we might recommend 500 to be consistent with that Come Home to Edina program. And also, this is just anecdotal, but we have had to turn some people away that have been interested in the program that they income qualify, but their home is worth too much money. Typically, we've seen that will be seniors that have just been in their home for a long time, they're on a fixed income, but the house has just appreciated, and they're no longer under that 450 limit. And then the third item for you to consider is just clarifying the intent on your interest to purchase condos. As I mentioned, one benefit of the program is that the HRA can buy the home from the borrower, and the borrower can have their loan forgiven. That was envisioned to be primarily for single-family homes because our program partners that we partner with for long-term preservation, Homes Within Reach and Metro HRA, Family Affordable Housing Program, they deal with single-family homes. So we don't have a current mechanism to take in a condo. So I don't think that staff would be recommending that the HRA purchase a condo. And the reason this is timely, we do have one borrower he's a condo owner, he's looking to sell, and reached out asking if the HRA might be interested. So we're just kind of looking for some direction from you all. If staff can just kind of communicate that, no, we wouldn't be interested in purchasing a condo, or do you want us to bring each of those to you as they come up? So just to summarize, we're looking for direction on these three items and authorization to work with the city attorney to amend any contract documents that may be necessary. And with that, I'll hand it back to you for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Lewis? I think it was your written presentation and this presentation were very helpful. Thank you. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. I want to dig into really point number one as we're considering converting it to a revolving loan program. To date, have any loans been repaid? And I know it's only been 2 years, but have we seen any come back yet?
Yeah, so they're not required to make any payments, but they can. There have been a couple people, not sure why, but they have made some small payments. I think there's been about $6,000 that's been paid back. So yeah, part of the reason we're bringing this to you is we want to know what we need to do with that money.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure some analysis has been done, and if not, that's quite all right as well. But when are we expecting this money to come back in, right? I don't expect that every loan that's offered will live out the full 30 years before repayment. Has there been an analysis on the overall life expectancy average of these loans?
We haven't done any in-depth analysis. I think it's really hard to know because it's just whenever they sell it, or it could be when it no longer becomes the borrower's primary home. And there's just no way to know when that's going to be, because that could vary from borrower to borrower.
Okay.
But yeah.
We do know anecdotally, and this is not to say that there's a timeline, a lot of the borrowers are seniors. And they may choose different living options than their single-family homes. I mean, I don't know if that, I don't want to be crass or anything, but a lot of them are have been in their homes for 30, 40 years, and this is just something to make their last years in their homes more comfortable. But I don't know if that has any indication.
Thank you. And so as I'm looking at this, right, in the 2 years that the program's been around, we've loaned out approximately $1 million. And so if right now the total budget is only approximately $1.5 million, when do you expect that to be depleted? And will more investment be required? Because I'm assuming we won't see substantial repayment yet of those loans.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard to say. I think it was something like in the first year there were 31 loans issued, and then in the last year there's only been 11. So some of that could be we haven't marketed the program as much since it first kicked off. Some of that could be that, like I said, we've had some interest that we've had to turn away because the homes have been too valuable, and some of that is from the increase in home prices the last 2 years. So some of that is maybe fewer homes are eligible. So yeah, there's about $400,000 left. That's about less than a third of what's left. I would say maybe it would last another year and a half if there was no additional allocation. But yeah, part of the reason coming here today is to find out if we can reuse those, recycle those funds as they come back in, then we'll get a little bit more coming, and maybe that'll stretch it out a little bit further before we get to zero. And then you could decide again, do you want to allocate more money to it or not?
Wonderful. Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for now.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you. So the couple of things, just for feedback. One, I think it's smart for us to try to make this as sustainable as possible. I understand that when you look at the construct, people aren't going to repay these loans fast enough, probably, for that to add the sustainability. So I agree with a lot of the questioning from Commissioner Agnew. It almost feels as though we have to, we're kind of relying on the properties changing hands in order to get that cash to infuse the program, which I think that's fine. So I do think we are going to have to add additional investment at some point. But I think these loans should be as sustainable as possible. And the concept of keeping those dollars in that fund, given that we've voted on it and approved this as a construct that we want to go forward with, I'd be comfortable with that. Increasing the home value, again, I think market should dictate that. And if market is saying, hey, it's set at a value that is not allowing us to serve the intent of the program, I'm okay with looking at the analysis and increasing the home limit. For me, the only one that I'm kind of in the middle on is declining the option to buy condos. And when I think of that one, I think I would be in favor of buying condos if they're affordable condos, so that we can add that to our stock as we kind of think of sustainable, naturally occurring, affordable single-family homes. So I kind of think that could make some sense to do that, but I'm not sure on the third point. There I probably would want a little bit more analysis to understand that a little bit better, but that's the feedback that I have.
I can respond to that. That third point about, the reason we're asking that is because, like I said, right now, when the HRA does acquire a home, we have two programs that we partner with to kind of transfer that home into a land trust or to the Metro HRA, and they only take single family. So like right now, we don't have anything we could do with a condo. There aren't any other programs that we're aware of that would accept that. Accept a condo for long-term preservation. And also, as Stephanie pointed out to me, is that just condos are just generally more affordable anyway, and there isn't as much of a need to preserve them for affordability. Because there's just more of them, and they just tend to be more affordable in general.
So that's helpful. So then, if I kind of play that back, there really is no construct today that we could do anything if we were to purchase a condo.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep. We have a condo owner who's looking to sell his.
I got you.
He kind of reached out asking, would the city be interested in purchasing it?
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, well, we don't really have anything we could do with it. So if we were to bring it before you, we would probably recommend that we not purchase it. And so then that just leads to the question of, are we going to bring every condo before you and ask you if you're just going to decline it? We just want to be transparent with those borrowers about the likelihood of that loan forgiveness.
Okay, that makes total sense. And so I actually agree with what you're suggesting. Yeah, thank you.
Manager Hawkinson, did you have anything you wanted to add on that point?
Chair, Commissioners, when this program was first conceived, it was trying to figure out mechanisms for single-family housing preservation based on the comprehensive plan, based on what you're hearing when you're door knocking, based on those other variables. And since condominiums right now are on the market as affordable, there was no call for ongoing preservation of the affordability of condominiums and townhomes. Where there was a lot of call in the community of how are we making single-family ownership more affordable, and how do we keep it affordable in the long term. So this is one of the tools that it has an ancillary benefit that helping people maintain their homes, so in dealing with deferred maintenance, but the forgiveness element of that was designed to try to bring more homes into long-term affordability for ownership opportunities.
Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple questions and a couple comments. First of all, what's the funding source for this program?
Yep, the funding comes from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is primarily funded by?
Buy-in fee, and
Buy-in fee.
that's it.
Okay, so I just want to say that the buy-in fee is going towards permanent affordability and for people to be able to stay in their homes and fix it up, because that's an important thing that we need the public to understand. But related to that, the Investment Reduction Act is putting money into programs like this. And so I hope that you're in conversation with Manager Hancock as that money comes in and as a source, and I hope that we can use that, because as an organizing idea, the idea of weatherizing homes is great. Getting out to people and getting the word out and getting the funds into people's homes is very difficult. And so I hope that we can use this program as a way to use those Investment Reduction Act funds to weatherize homes. So I just want to alert that to you. So that's the first question I had. The second one is, with the second question you've got about increasing the home value, can we just track this with Come Home to Edina so that we don't have to keep coming back and changing it? Is it possible to just say, when we raise it for Come Home to Edina, we raise it for this program as well, because they are linked? Is that possible? You're nodding. Can you?
Yeah, that would be up to you. But
That's what I would recommend.
See why that would.
Because rather than keep coming back for both programs, let's just tie them together. We'll look at Come Home to Edina, which is really the umbrella project here, or a program. So I would recommend that. As far as the revolving fund, absolutely. Yes, let's make this a revolving fund. This is a great program. It covers so many bases. I am in favor of that. With the payoff, Commissioner Agnew asked some really good questions, and I wonder whether there isn't some market data out there sort of saying, this is people 65 and over. What is the predicted rate of people moving out of their homes? And there's got to be data out there on that, and I would encourage you to just see if it's out there. And if so, then we can kind of get a feel for what the rate of repayment will be and the purchasing. As far as the condominiums go, I really like to retain flexibility. So my advice on this would be I have two things. One is, until we have a program, we will deny purchasing a condominium, but not to change the policy. So at some point, we may have a program where we can preserve the affordability of condominiums. And then, I don't have to go back and change the policy. But for now, we'll just say no, because we don't have a way a program to receive those condominiums. And to that point, we are building a senior co-op at the former Public Works site. And some of those are going to be permanently affordable. And I know that's unique to that site, but if there are any lessons that we are learning from that, and that we could use that for preserving other condominiums as affordable, I would encourage us to do that. And that's way above my understanding of real estate to recommend that. But I would just, think about those two things in conjunction and whether there are some lessons that we can learn from that program. So to your questions, convert to revolving, absolutely. Increase the home value to tie it to Come Home to Edina and to retain the flexibility. But for now, we're not going to be buying condominiums. So those are my recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. And now, Commissioner Risser, your thoughts, please.
I agree with what my fellow commissioners have said, and the only thing that I can think of adding is, it seems all of these three items seem very pragmatic, and I know you all are very busy, and they just vanished in front of me, and I've only had half a cup of coffee, but I can't imagine getting, like $2,000 or $3,000 and just kind of wondering, okay, what do I do with this? So I appreciate all of these asks and am supportive of them.
Thank you. A couple of thoughts come to mind as my colleagues are discussing the matter and asking you some questions. With respect to the source of funds issue, it struck me that because we think this program is an important tool in our toolbox, and the funds come from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, might we consider firewalling off a certain percentage of that money? You had a $1 million demand in the first 2 years of the 1.5 that was there. You just give it some thought. If you think you'd want us to firewall off some money out of that Affordable Housing Trust Fund for this purpose, let us know. We would consider that, I think. And then in terms of source of data for rate of turnover on home ownership, I think you could, though it's condominiums, I think you could use the Centennial Lakes condominiums that were built as affordable units back in the 80s and take a look at how often those loans were repaid, where they got, basically come home to Edina type loans early on to support them, and see what the rate of turnover was and the payback rate on those loans. And I bet the Housing Foundation has that information, and that may help us make some projections. The other thing is that on the condominiums, we've been talking a lot about the value of home ownership in Edina and trying to figure out ways to make NOAA work more effectively, those naturally occurring affordable housing, single-family homes. But it strikes me that even though condominiums are affordable, some of them that may be purchased on an affordable basis may need work. And we want to make sure that we keep the housing stock in our town in really good condition. And so I'd like to see us develop a program where we can make sure that with respect to ownership, whether it's single-family home or condominium or townhouse, this program gets extended in some form or fashion to be able to make sure people can maintain the property at the standards they want to have for themselves and that we want as a community.
If I could add to that, so condominiums are eligible to borrow the money to make the improvements. The recommendation here is, or what we're seeking clarification on, is just whether you're comfortable, I guess, with staff kind of just communicating to the borrowers when they approach us, would the HRA be interested in purchasing my property, that we could say, not at this time because there's not a program. We didn't want to make that call without kind of getting permission from you all first. But condominiums are eligible to borrow the funds to make the improvements, to kind of keep them updated and make those energy improvements. So that would continue.
What I understood your question was whether we should decline the option to purchase condominiums. That's not really what I'm talking about. If the condominiums are affordable and somebody can buy them because they are affordable and they're in that category of a certain percentage of area median income, 30 to 80%, somewhere in there, for example, that if those units then need work, that they can fix them up. And I know that we've got some programs that allow for some borrowings or maybe even some grants, but I just think it's something worth looking at, that we create a reserve or a fund where they could borrow money to make home improvements, not necessarily us purchasing the condo. Okay. That's it for me. So I think you got unanimity of opinion up here. Do you need a motion to that effect, or do you have sufficient guidance?
We'd like a motion.
All right. Is there a motion to authorize the HRA to convert the program that exists now into a revolving loan fund so that repaid loans remain in the program and can be used for new loans, that the HRA be able to amend the home value limit of $450,000 upward to $500,000, and then have that be an automatic escalator with in consistency with what's that program? Come Home to Edina.
Come Home to Edina.
Come Home to Edina, and then also decline the option to purchase condominiums as part of this particular program at the present time. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Agnew moves. Commissioner Pierce seconds. The motion is stated. All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Manager Hawkinson. And the next matter, our Economic Development Manager has Bill Neuendorf, and we've got Nick Anhut of Ellers with us here to answer any questions that pertain to the analysis that went on with respect to the staff recommendation to approve Resolution 2023-04 establishing the 72nd France 2 Tax Increment Financing District. And I'll turn now to Development Manager Bill Neuendorf.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Bill Neundorf, the city's economic development manager, to repeat that. The item we have as your last topic for this morning is consideration of a new resolution 2023-04 to potentially establish a new tax increment financing district called the 72nd and France 2 district. This resolution sets up the financial structure to use TIF on this site for a future project. So this morning we have the TIF plan that's in your packet. I've got the presentation, of course. I'm going to run through the presentation quickly to make sure that there's time to answer all of your questions. And to help with the questions and answers, Nick Anhut from Ehlers Associates is here. Mr. Anhut has provided counsel and advisory services to the HRA for several years and is very familiar with this site because it's been discussed quite a few times over the years. But we're here today with a new recommendation. What I wanted to run through this morning in the presentation is touching on the background of the site in brief, a quick explanation about how TIF works and why we're discussing it this morning, and then have a summary look into the TIF plan, and then finally a fiscal evaluation and staff recommendation. So just for background purposes, the two sites were originally built in the late 60s and early 70s. They were two office buildings. They were positive assets to the community and to the France Avenue district for several decades, and that started to change about a decade ago as they became more obsolete, deferred maintenance, et cetera. Both of those buildings were demolished last year. In 2019, the city did hire a company called Stantec Consulting to inspect the buildings, to look at their qualifications in case TIF was used. So the photos in the report are from 2019, and since those photos were taken and before the buildings were demolished, the conditions just got worse. Through the pandemic, the buildings were vacant. One of them had been determined to be unsafe for occupancy by our building department. There was security fencing just to try to secure the site, but that was fairly ineffective in preventing vandalism, trespassing, and just a lot of further damage to the buildings. So the HRA last year did pass a resolution that allowed the owner to remove the building before we even have the conversation today about TIF. But staff felt it was in the public interest to remove those buildings as they did present a potential danger to life and safety. So these are some images from last summer with the security fencing, and again, a lot of the structural supports in that building, which were there temporarily to prevent it from collapsing. So that building is now down. One of the other important things to mention about the site is that it serves as a pool for stormwater runoff, not just from its own borders, but from the surrounding residential properties as well. So the image here, the red shows where the stormwater ponding collects. It's about half of the site is used for surface stormwater to the benefit of the surrounding neighborhood. That's something that has to be dealt with, and the developer has a plan and strategy for that. We've talked about this site for many years. We're getting close to 10 years of conversation about this site. Some plans have been approved, most have been denied. A couple were not looking good, so the developer withdrew them before they actually got formally denied. We thought we had good progress back in 2019 when we created the first TIF district for this site, but unfortunately that project was not able to be financed. And then over the last couple years, when that developer sold it, staff has had many conversations with the current ownership group about how to redevelop that property. We did have it under consideration as one of the finalists to put the new fire station in the Southdale district. And so I did meet with the developer and their architects on multiple occasions to move the puzzle pieces around and see what might fit there. Ultimately, the city decided not to select that site for the fire station. But it was really interesting to see all the various options that were considered to try to make this site work. But ultimately, what was approved just back in February was PUD 16. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. There's lots of information in the packet, but just know that the zoning program that was approved recently is the heart of this TIF plan. That's the outcome of the project. Anytime we consider TIF, we do look at our community plans and visions, of course. So there's a guiding plan for the HRA called the Southeast Edina Redevelopment District Plan. There's also the comprehensive plan, our sustainable buildings plan, our TIF policy plans, lots of plans and visions. We look at all those to make sure that what we're recommending is consistent with our city objectives. And of course, you've seen this slide on many occasions, but how TIF works is it's the incremental growth of property taxes from a time today when the site is underdeveloped or vacant to a point in the future where it has a new building on it that generates much more property taxes than it does today. So using this graphic just as a simple illustration, for the first several years of the district, it's kind of in growth mode as it struggles from vacancy to half-built to actually being completed. Once it's finished, it's stabilized, and the base market value or the base capacity from the site is shown in purple. And that always gets paid out to the city and the schools and the county, but it's that incremental tax. It's the difference from the old vacant site to the new finished site that's collected in this TIF district for a finite number of years to allow some of these public improvements to be financed. When the TIF district expires, that full capacity, the base plus the increment, then gets redistributed to the schools, the county, and the city. I think it's important to note that in Edina, we follow, of course, the state statute regarding TIF, but frankly, our policy is a bit tighter than the state statute allows, and we've designed that purposely to fulfill the concerns and objectives of the community. Here's also a slide that we update each year. We look at how much of Edina's tax capacity is located within a tax increment district. And on this chart, we compare the city of Edina to many of our peers that surround us. You'll notice Edina is on the far right of this chart. About 1% of our tax capacity is currently involved in a TIF district. If you look at several of our neighbors, they're up more towards 9, 10, 12% of their districts. So as a whole, Edina uses TIF less frequently and on a more limited basis than our surrounding neighbors. Doesn't make one community better or worse than the other, but just wanted to give you the snapshot of how we compare to our neighbors. And anytime we consider the use of tax increment financing, of course, we follow the steps that are mandated in the state statute. Ellers and Associates make sure that we keep on track and touch each of those steps. We also have legal input from Dorsey and Whitney, who's also very, very experienced in tax increment financing. They also make sure that we get the right things submitted to the right people at the right time. But today we're looking at the first step, and this is consideration of the district. Essentially, we're setting the budget and the boundaries and the overall scope of what can be financed in that district. We also set up the maximum budget that could be collected. In the future, we'll have a separate conversation about how we're going to spend those dollars, but today the conversation is really about how we're going to collect those. So the TIF plan is in your packet. It's I think about 90 pages. I'm not going to go through that in full detail, but it's all in there. 2 parcels, about 5 acres. We did include terminology so that public improvements can extend beyond the private property to the surrounding streets. So the intention is to make sure that there's strong sidewalk connections, crosswalk connections to get across the surrounding streets here. So we made sure that we have that covered in the TIF plan. We would recommend that we terminate the old housing TIF district that was set up for the old project that was not able to be financed, and instead replace it with a new redevelopment TIF district. That's a 25-year term. It would start in 2026 and then extend for 25 years after that. The current tax capacity from the site is just a little bit over $200,000. When the project is finished, it will be over $2 million, a 9 times increase. So that's something that whenever we look at tax increment financing, we're not just trying to make a little shift in the tax base of the community. We're looking for that large transformational shift to help with the future budgeting for the entire community. The TIF plan does outline a budget. Ellers has estimated that over the overall term of this TIF district, about $34 million is likely to be collected. And the projected use of how those funds could be used is shown in the right column. You, the HRA board, have jurisdiction to move some of those numbers around in the future. So we're not locked into one specific outcome today. But this, again, it's a budget to set the overall revenue and what the future could look like. We do expect to be back in front of you in late April or early May to talk more specifically about how those funds get spent. But today we're looking at how they get collected. The proposed TIF plan also contains a lot of information about the outcomes on the site. I'm going to just run through those. In fact, I'm not going to run through those. I think you're familiar with them. But know that it's the project that was approved in the most recent PUD. Lots of public benefits, multi-phase. The first phase of the project would be the office and all of the site work that has all the public benefits. The road, the sidewalks, the plaza, the path, the stormwater. That would all happen in the very first phase. The second phase is proposed to be a hotel. That would be built after everything else is completed. Let's see, I'm going to just run through these. So working with Mr. Anhut at Ellers, we did ask them to put some projections together about how the current proposal stacks up. And what the fiscal impact is to the community. So there's 2 charts that we shared here, and the first shows in green the typical average growth of the tax base in Edina. It's grown quite strongly in the last several years, the last 10 years or so. And then the blue bars show the projected growth based on the site, on the TIF site. So as you can see, the blue bars far exceed the average growth in Edina, and the average growth has been very strong. With this project, the growth on this site is even stronger. So that, again, we're looking out for the long-term stability of the tax base of the community. And then we also asked to imagine a little bit. So that this next slide is hypothetical in a way, but it answers the question, well, what if we did a development on the site without TIF that could be all privately financed? What's the fiscal impact? So this chart shows 3 different potentials. The blue line on the bottom is something that, is no longer possible, but it would have been, what if the old buildings were rehabbed and reoccupied? Last summer, that was an option. So the blue line kind of shows that scenario, had they been rehabbed. The orange or red line shows a project that is smaller in scale and self-funded, privately funded without TIF. And you'll see over the time it grows at a nice pace. But the question is, where's the overall impact of the community? Where's that benefit, the fiscal benefit? So in about the year 2020, between 2051 and 2054 is where that pendulum shifts. And that's the black line. So the black line is the proposed development with TIF financing. So for the first life of that TIF district, the overall collection slightly lags a privately financed project. But when the TIF district ends, that's where things change. So the upward trajectory on the proposed project, since it's more ambitious in scale and scope, increases at a much higher rate than a less ambitious project. So whenever a tax increment is talked about, there's two things we look at: short-term benefit, long-term benefit. In this proposal, the short-term benefit is all the public improvements. The new streets, the new sidewalks, the new plazas, all those things that we envision and ask developers to give us in the Southdale plan. This developer is able to accommodate that. And then we also look at the long-term fiscal impact, and we find that a project of this scale and scope, even with the use of tax increment, is still in the long-term interest of the community. So in conclusion, we find that this site does qualify as a redevelopment TIF district per state statute. We find that the site plan is generally consistent with the city's overall plans for redevelopment in our Southdale design guidelines and all those types of policies. We find that this project is capable of delivering many of the public benefits, those public realm improvements, that would not otherwise be delivered. The city budget, our capital plan, has no, we're not planning on building a road through private property. We have no money budgeted for that today. It's not even on the wish list in the future. But this project can deliver that. In our conversations with the developer, we find that the high construction costs and the current financing conditions in the country do create a financial gap that would hinder or prevent the delivery of this project. And per Eller's estimates, we find that this project does create enough incremental taxes to make sure that we can meet that gap. So in conclusion, we find that the use of tax increment financing is one of the solutions to make this project happen. Always a reminder, I say it's one of the solutions. There's still a lot of private equity in this project and a whole lot of private debt. So TIF is about 5% of the overall financing of this project. But we find that it is an essential ingredient to see this project through. My recommendation is to approve the resolution that's in front of you this morning. Again, no, this is one of many steps. We go to Planning Commission next week. We'll be back at City Council in April. So this is not the final answer. This is just one step along the way. But the primary reason why I'm supportive of this resolution is because we've been looking at different options for this site for 9 years. We've gone through about 9 different proposals that have failed and were not successfully built. In the last couple of years, for about 2 years, we had many conversations with the developer dreaming what could happen there. We talked retail, we talked medical office, we've talked fire stations, we've talked banks. There's been lots of conversation, and if you drive by the site, you see a vacant hole in the ground. I think it's time to move this site forward, and that's one of my biggest reasons to support this, is to see that progress in the community. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Manager Newendorf. Turn to Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it is a rare thing in Edina to have a nuisance property. But this genuinely was a nuisance property. We were hearing from all kinds of residents, this is dangerous, there's graffiti, there's vandalism. How can we have this crime-ridden site in this beautiful city? And if for no other reason, to modify and rebuild on this site is incredibly important, because we don't want nuisance properties in our city. I would say this is probably a textbook case for using TIF in a fully developed suburb. One of the things that goes into this is tearing down an old nuisance building and preparing the site for new construction. And that is not something you need to do in a cornfield. You know, taking down corn stalks is very different from taking down 2 office buildings. And that's a big expense, and that's something that is in the benefit of every citizen in Edina. It also handles water for not only this site, but also the neighboring sites. And whoever builds on this is going to have to deal with the water on the site. But the fact that we can do it in a way that has public amenities, it draws from the neighboring properties and turns what is a problem into a benefit is an important thing. I want to stress, too, the Edina overlay with TIF. The way that we structure TIF to put the risk on the developer is incredibly important. And I really appreciate the expertise that Ellers goes into this, and that the policy that we've worked with through Dorsey and Whitney is very much an Edina program. And that overlay means that we get as much public benefit as we can, and it really manages the risk to the city. In the alternatives, there is a minimum water treatment. There will be some, but it won't have the quality that we're looking at. We're also following the the Southdale guidelines, creating a north-south pedestrian biking experience and connection. We'll be using the green building policy on this project. That's not something that's guaranteed in a privately financed deal. And when I talked to Manager Neuendorf yesterday about this project, he pointed something out, and that is, right now, we have a vision for what France Avenue is going to look like, but it's not there. And we've got 70th and France that's being built. We have this project that's being built, and potentially the Macy's project going forward. And these are pieces of the puzzle. And because we depend on private development to create this vision that we have for France in particular, but the Southdale area in general, this is an important part of that. And if we want to transform this area into a new vision of what an inner-ring suburb can look like, we have to approve projects. We can't sit and wait forever, because we are dependent on the private market to do this. We're not going to come in with $1 billion and rebuild it on our own. And I think this is a really important puzzle piece in that overall vision. I like the way we're going on France Avenue. And again, we're dealing with flooding. We're dealing with a nuisance project. We're dealing with creating public spaces. If this is privately redeveloped, those plazas are shut off to the public. Because we are using public funds to build the plaza between the two buildings and the plaza along France and the stormwater collection park, those are now going to be public areas. We're getting an easement for the public to use those. One of the proposals that was looked at a few years ago had a plaza, but it was really set away from the public. It was really more for the employees of that building and not inviting the public in. This is all going to be public realm when it's done. And I think that's a really important element, because we've got this beautiful facility, and to shut it off from the neighborhood, I think would be wrong. And I really am pleased that that's going to be a green space that everyone can enjoy. So with that, I will support this project.
Thank you. Commissioner Pierce?
I don't care the order.
Okay. So I just had 3 comments. So thanks, Commissioner Jackson, for walking through the TIF construct. My comments are, I'm not going to say are really related to comments from council and then your follow-up today. So first, in the council meeting I talked about, wasn't comfortable with the phased approach of the public realm benefit. I agree with Commissioner Jackson. When we think about using TIF, I've always talked about, well, what's the benefit to the community? These are dollars that the community is investing. What are they going to get for it? And so I appreciate you saying all of the public realm benefits are in phase 1. I think before it was like 80-20 or something like that. And I met with the developers to go through that. And in that meeting, they said, yeah, for sure, they'd be willing to make sure all of the public realm benefits are in that first phase. And I think that's an important point, because I agree with Commissioner Jackson. If we weren't doing public financing, this was 100% private, we could get some of these benefits, but we have less control over which benefits. And so I appreciate that, that change. Can you go to, I think it's slide 31. Love this slide. And so the conversation about really understanding if we were to modify or renovate, right? We talked about that a little bit, versus private development. Like what's the benefit broadly in the community? And so I like this slide a lot. And so I had 2 points on here that I think I get this, but just to reiterate, that red line is we would do a small scale redevelopment. And the question I have is the public realm benefits if we were to do the red line. I think you talked about that a little bit, but can you just clarify in this projection what we think would be happening there if it was a small scale development with relationship to the public realm benefits that are on the other slide?
Thank you for the question. Nick Anhut with Ehlers and Associates. This is purely a financial projection where we tried to envision what would happen on this site if we were going to eliminate any public assistance in the project. And so what kind of a development, what scale of redevelopment could be 100% privately financed? And I think what we would end up doing in that circumstance is assuming that some of these public realm improvements did not take place. They were not. We would essentially all of the equity and debt from the private aspect would be invested into developing a larger scale office and retail development than exists today.
Yeah.
That's not to say that the city would not have land use controls to potentially maybe prevent that from occurring, but this analysis does not look into that. We're assuming that those public improvements don't take place.
Right. And so that's the point I wanted to hear, right? Because I'm assuming when I look at this, that really means in that scenario, we might get a bigger, prettier box, but we may not get the public benefit of, the plaza, right? Because those dollars, rather than going into beautifying the site, would go into the building, is the way I was interpreting that. And it just didn't come out clear on this slide. I personally think, I haven't seen a slide like this before. I think we should really look at this slide and consider kind of modifying it a little bit to make that point clear. And this should become a cornerstone slide when we talk about these types of benefits. Because then you go the next step and say, all right, but if we do invest, then here's the benefit. And then you see the black line and what the future benefit for the community is. So I just thought that this slide was laid out nicely. But when we talk about it, even though it's a projection, right, it's kind of a forecast, if you will, we should still, I think, talk about what we think would happen with those dollars if you were to do a renovation. Would be the same, right, but you would get a smaller box, likely, and then private funding. So thanks for that slide. Thank you. And then the last question, I think I wrote down the wrong, slide 16. And this one, yeah, so the 9X increase, okay, and then I didn't write this slide down, but it's the cliff slide with the text, increment, red, yellow in the
30,
middle.
I think.
There we go.
30.
This
Oh,
one.
that one.
Yeah.
30 also helps on
Yeah.
that issue.
So can you describe, let's see if I can get my question right. So the one slide shows the new tax base. And then on this slide, you were trying to articulate what the increment is of the TIF district. Can you take the dollars on that slide, on the slide 16, and then in this construct, just explain how the community will benefit from that increase in tax base? Does that make sense?
It does. Yes, let me take a stab, and Nick might be my color commentator on this one.
Well, let me say one more quick thing, because when we look at it, we talk about 25 years out, and it gives this this feeling that the benefit of the tax increment won't be realized for 25 years. And then we talk about the public realm, which we're going to get immediately, and we know what that costs because we have that in the TIF plan. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, because I think those two slides kind of help explain that.
Yeah. So so that initial physical benefit of having the new sidewalks and new roadway and all that happens early on, right? As soon as the building is built and finished, we have that public benefit. But from a financial perspective, what I have up on the screen now, it's just hypothetical. It's not a real graph, so don't rely on the actual pitch of the lines or anything. But a stronger tax base of the community is in the city's interest for a couple reasons, but primarily to provide stability and predictability for future taxpayers. Edina has been blessed to have a strong tax base for many decades, generations. Not every community is like that. But yet, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because there's strategic decisions that are made along the way to make sure that properties that are starting to decline don't plummet, that they're stopped before they hit rock bottom, maybe when they're close to rock bottom, and then they go in the upwards trajectory. When there's a larger tax base, what that means to the individual taxpayer is that they'll get the same services in the budget, but at a slightly lower cost to each individual taxpayer. I think what we find, though, in this community is they're not interested in the same services. They're typically interested in slightly better services. But the cost of those improved services, whether it's snow plowing or street repaving or whatever the service is, you can provide that higher level of expectation, spread the cost out amongst a larger tax base, and minimize that direct cost to each individual property owner. So that's the fiscal benefit that happens both early on and in the future. Nick, do you have anything more specific to add?
The only Howard Cosell color commentary I would give on that is, so the value that's depicted is created right away. When the private investment takes place on the project, there is a tax value that is created. The property does pay property taxes just like any other property within the community. It's just the incremental taxes are captured separately and allocated towards repaying the investment made in those public realm benefits that we are encouraging with this redevelopment. So the yellow on this slide is essentially those funds are still created, they're still public dollars, but they're being allocated towards this TIF plan budget and paying for those public realm improvements. At the end of the TIF district, and once, which could be 25 years from now, but if it actually grows, it could be paid down much sooner. At the end of the TIF district, those public realm benefits have already been paid for using the captured value in those TIF dollars, and now all of that public tax dollars contributes to the general tax base, to what Mr. Neuendorf is mentioning as far as all of the services within the community, if that helps.
Yes, that's the narrative that I think is really important to hit, and oftentimes I think that gets not that it gets missed, but it's so complicated that it's just not clear, and so I think that narrative is super helpful to understand how these dollars get collected, then what they get used for, who benefits from them, and then after the district ends, then you've got this much bigger tax base that then gets spread even more broadly across the community. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Risser.
I do want to articulate, one of the wonderful things and also frustrating things and energizing things is we do have differences of opinion. And I think that's important. Our community represents different views. And one of the things that I keep thinking about when I look at this site are all of the public benefits that surround it. The bike trail, okay? A stone's throw away from Centennial Lakes. We now have Fred Richards, and we have passed a sales tax referendum. So nearby, we've also got this beautiful park. And as I look at this development, and I do want to stress that I respect the development that I've seen thus far. I think it's a very beautiful development. I personally do not think that, for me, it is TIF worthy. And yes, we can talk about the incremental taxes being captured. They are there, they are being collected, they are being used for that specific site. However, I look at that office building, I think about the additional use that the existing public infrastructure, right? What a beautiful site adjacent to the bike trail. How awesome is that? And that has worth. And the rest of the taxpayers will be paying for maintaining that bike trail, maintaining, the other benefits that are around it. And so that really does matter to me. And I think about our schools, and I think about, properties surrounding, picking up that burden. And yes, it will increase the value of the property immediately, but it will also increase the stress on our public services and infrastructure immediately. And so I'm a total cost kind of person, and I think that really does need to be taken into account. The other thing that I have concerns about, we're talking about 25 years, and I wish I had a crystal ball, but you think about what was on the site, 2 office buildings becoming obsolete. What did we read about last night in the paper? We read about United Health Partners closing down its office park in Minnetonka. Okay. Is it a secure investment to create an office building at this particular moment? Maybe it is. I think it's going to be a beautiful office building. And I think in large part because of the existing physical infrastructure, public infrastructure that Edina has and will be providing to this project, that office space has a much stronger chance of being successful. When I look at the project and I think about where we are and the idea of moving forward with TIF funding, and I look at that list of possible ways we could identify how TIF was used. And I know Commissioner Pierce talked about this the last time and how, it's sort of frustrating to see, well, you can pick these different items. And I see affordable housing and I'm wondering, where's affordable housing if it's going to be a hotel? The other thing is I think, I wasn't here when this project moved forward and was awarded PUD status, but has the public had the opportunity to talk about that second area being a hotel? There's a bit of ambiguity going on here, and that also makes me uncomfortable. So, and then finally, thinking about where it started, and I do understand, we do not want to have projects that are nuisance, property that are, not projects, property that has fallen into disrepair. And I know, this was a site where, you really did have a lot of our resources going to address activities that should not have been happening. When I see projects falling into disrepair, and I'm thinking about this part of Edina, but I've also heard about projects people are concerned about in the country club area where you end up having, what's known, and this is a term, demolition by neglect. And that's not something that we want to allow anywhere in Edina. And I'm not sure addressing it by saying, okay, this happened, we need to provide TIF. I really don't see that as a sustainable solution. And then actually, I'm sorry I said finally, but another final, we talk about, well, there's going to be a street that's going to be put in, and this is part of the Greater Southdale Area Plan. Look at all the properties where the Greater Southdale Area Plan calls for putting in streets. Are we going to provide TIF funding for every single one of those? So those are my concerns, and those are the reasons why I really don't think I can support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Agnew.
I'm going to start with a couple of questions. And first I want to, if you could go back to that slide that looked at some of the projects that ultimately didn't move forward. And I'm specifically curious about the one from 2019, because that I think is the one on here that was approved and was moving forward, but ultimately couldn't secure the financing. Do you have any more information on that you can provide? Because as I understand that there was an approved TIF district for this. In that situation, why was that still not enough for this project to move forward?
So I don't have anything in writing on that one, but I think on the city's website, all the old formal documents are out there. Happy to dig those up if that's helpful. But I think the short story is the cost of constructing that project was just too high. Through the plan approval process and the site planning process, this was a very sensitive site for the neighbors. It was there was a lot of design by committee as it reached that point of finally being approved. And each one of those steps along the way added cost to the project. At one point, there was a requirement to lower the building by like a couple feet. I don't remember the precise amount, which meant they had to switch from a traditional construction method to a unique construction method that added a couple $1 million of cost. Doesn't increase the rent, it just increases the cost. So that concern was raised fairly early after the plans were approved. The city staff was approached by at least one developer or contractor that was trying to get a better price to build it. And they came in and asked, can we get that extra 2 feet back? And can we, all the beautiful glitz on the corner, can we eliminate that? Because it just adds a lot of cost and no benefit. And at the time, sitting in some of those meetings, staff felt that the Planning Commission and the City Council were very clear at that time that those extra embellishments were essential. So we suggested that they could come and ask to change the plans, but they should expect to get rejected. So we know they did talk. The developers did get estimates from multiple contractors. As I mentioned, we met with one, had phone calls, as I recall, from another. They were all of the same type of questions. What can we do to cut costs and still deliver the project? And we weren't able to make that fit. And ultimately, when they went to the investment community and the lending community, the numbers didn't make sense. Even with a $12.2 million TIF contribution in that project, the numbers didn't make sense. And at some point, the developer just gave up and sold it.
Thank you. I appreciate that background. So what we're looking at here today, if I'm correct, is something around $34 million. Is that correct?
So the TIF plan has a maximum budget of $34 million.
Okay. That's
the estimate of overall property taxes collected over the 26-year period. And that does assume, it does assume that the second phase site is either a hotel or housing, because housing was part of that initial PUD. And I know there'll be a hotel conversation in the next month with the Planning Commission and City Council. But we estimated on the high side, just to make sure that we captured all of the possibilities.
So it's a kind of like a cap.
Correct.
It can be under.
It's exactly a cap,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think in general, my thoughts on this one are, I like the idea of TIF. I like that it's something that we have at our disposal and that it's a tool the city can use to prioritize investment in the way that we want to see it done. I'm really supportive of leveraging it when I see that connection to the public impact, right? And I know we've talked a little bit about what that looks like here. What I've seen to date about this project, and I understand that we didn't receive any update on any potential changes really since we last reviewed it. This project as it currently stands, and as I understand it, doesn't yet meet that bar for me of the public benefit that I want to see when using TIF. I think if we were approving everything today, it wouldn't be something that I would be able to support. But I am, however, comfortable with continuing the conversation and really attempting to partner to make it into something that I can support. I do think that there is a lot of opportunity, and I know that we'll continue to have dialogue and a voice in what components are a part of that. And I think hearing from you, right, that we're talking right now about a cap and that we'll work together to identify what exactly that looks like. I'm at least comfortable with moving to the next stage of the process. But again, want to see some iteration from where we're at today in order for me to be able to support it. Thank you.
First of all, to answer, I think one of Commissioner Risser's questions with respect to Phase 2, that would still be subject to approval. We haven't seen anything with respect to Phase 2. It's a placeholder, so they'll have to go through the normal process.
Correct.
With all kinds of public input on that
Correct.
issue. So, and then with respect to the notion that there might be more stress on public services, as she pointed out, there were 2 office buildings there before. I think we've done some studies on whether there's any incremental increase in traffic or anything else over there, but I don't have that data in front of me. And for me, it's not relevant to what we're thinking about in terms of this overall project. France Avenue is our main street. It's the most important, arguably the most important commercial street in our community. And we want to try to maximize what we do on France Avenue to take advantage of that main street that's been so vitally successful, vitally important to the success of our community. So what we have here in front of us is $160 million worth of potential development, as I understand it, from looking at my notes from the prior meeting. Thinking that we have a PUD 16 approved for the site in terms of its use, the determination that it qualifies as a redevelopment district for the use of TIF. The amount of TIF to be allocated is, I think, upwards of, by state law, over $12 million, as I recall. Or is it even higher than that? What we could use for TIF under state law, what we could capture for TIF.
Yeah, it'd be it'd be more than that, actually. We haven't done that comparison of what hypothetically could be versus what we're suggesting, but it's the state law would allow us to use TIF to a higher extent than we do.
Right, and what I recall, and from your presentation, our staff recommendation is that we have $7.55 million in TIF, which would represent about 5% of the overall funding.
That's correct.
Or financing.
Correct.
Is that correct? All right. So the question for me becomes, if we want to maximize the potential of this redevelopment, is it worth a 5% investment? And we kind of went through the same dialogue when we made about a 5% investment, I think, or in Southdale, to maximize the remodel over there. Now, other things have happened in the world of retail, but in terms of getting the maximum bang for the buck, that 5% of investment over there led to some really significant changes in what occurred around there that allowed us to really see some beautiful growth and some improvements on properties. I think the same thing would happen here. So for that 5% investment, we're getting an incredible bargain, I think, that we're going to be able to access 51% of the site will be used for either public use or public access. That's an immense public benefit on a 4.9 acre piece of property. that 5% investment leverages public use on that site. So for that $7.5 million investment by our public, we're going to be part of a project that is going to maximize its potential along France Avenue. And to me, that's really an important consideration. The other thing I like to think about, and I think it's slide 30, when you think about as Mr. Anhut said, you're capturing the increment to pay for the public investment. It's not that the taxes go away that are paid to the school district and the county and the city. They continue on. And so the analysis for me has always been, is it worth the wait? Instead of getting your little bit of an increase every year over time, is that better or worse than setting up a 25-year TIF district? And slide 30 shows you, at least in my mind, that there's great value in continuing as is with the property tax, but then seeing that increment realize itself and go back into the public domain after year 25. It shows that it was well worth the 5% investment that we made in this project to maximize its potential and get $160 million worth of development out of it. So that's kind of the way I've looked at this thing, that this is a great public investment. To me, it's a win-win-win all the way around. And it's going to be a fabulous addition to our community. It's taking a block-long stretch along the prime part of France Avenue and making it realize its potential. And I think that's really critically important. So I think everybody's had a chance to express their thoughts. This is about establishing the district. We've still got ways to go yet, both at the council and the HRA level. So is there a motion to approve Resolution 2023-04 establishing the 72nd France 2 Tax Increment Financing District?
So moved.
Is there a second? We've got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Pierce, to approve Resolution 2023-04 establishing the 72nd France 2 Tax Increment Financing District. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Abstain?
She said.
2 nays?
Nay.
Kate said nay?
I said aye.
Oh, you said aye?
I approved.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Aye. Yeah, I guess that's right. You did talk about approving the district and want to see some improvements on the public side of it. All right, thank you. Thank you, Member Risser. 4 ayes, 1 nay. All right, the matter is approved. Executive Director comments.
Nothing to add this morning, sir.
Commissioner comments. Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been having a lot of conversations in the last couple of weeks about affordable housing. And I know when we had our housing task force, we had a lot of community members assembled together to talk about what housing looks like in Edina. And I wonder whether we ever, as an HRA, want to have a task force. I know that was for a specific purpose, but we do have so many people who are passionate in this community about the discussion of affordable housing. And I just want to put the idea out there that maybe we might think about occasionally impaneling a panel of citizens to talk about that issue. Like I said, we've got so much knowledge and passion, and I'd love to be able to get that community feedback in a formalized setting. So I just want to throw the idea out there as just
Okay,
a
good.
preliminary idea. So that's it. Thank you.
That causes me to think about a meeting that Manager Neal and I were part of the other day with an organization called LISC. And that might be a predicate to what Commissioner Jackson is talking about. And we haven't gone through the analysis on that, but you might explain a little bit about that group that came to see us quickly.
Well, in short, Member Commissioner Pierce was there as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Pierce was there.
We've had a discussion with a group that is trying to put together a new affordable housing fund that would take in kind of private investment dollars from whether they're from individuals or corporate entities or other investors, pool those monies into a fund that would provide financing to affordable housing projects specifically in Bloomington, Edina, and St. Paul. So We've had an initial discussion with those folks. They're putting more information together for us to share with the HRA, so I think that will be something that's coming soon. It's akin to a project that Ms. Hawkinson and Commissioner Pierce had been talking about and doing some initial analysis on as well.
Your observations, Commissioner Pierce, on that meeting with LISC?
So I thought it was extremely promising, and it did really seem very similar to the work that we have been focused on, I'd say over the last year or so. And then if we remember, we did authorize, I think about $30,000 or something like that to have a different consulting firm do some analysis on creating the same type of funding structure. And so I came away from that meeting thinking there was potential there. So looking forward to the next steps.
Yeah. My attitude was similar, or my view was similar. I think there is potential there. And Eric Johnson, who went from the equivalent of Stephanie Hawkinson's position at Bloomington, who is now running Aon, was the one who kind of set this whole thing up. And he did the same thing in Dallas, and they've created about a $100 million affordable housing fund down there, as I recall the number anyway. Their goal is $300 million, but they're at about $100 million down there with public, private, and non-profit contributions into this fund. So you're right in tune here with what's going on. So it's something we can think about from a task force standpoint, but it might be helpful to get through that conversation with LISC about the fund first.
Yeah.
And then,
That's
okay,
fascinating.
good.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Safe travels to all of you. Yeah, enjoy. You'll have a great experience out there. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Commissioner Jackson moves and Commissioner Agnew seconds the motion to adjourn the meeting of the HRA on this Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried? Stand adjourned. Thanks, Mr. Anhut, for being